Well, we're gonna go ahead and get started here.
The only new one on there was Darren Maples. It's about the fourth one, or third one down from the top.
Yeah. Yeah, he had that, that was gonna break it loose,
Yeah.
all the scar tissue. Remember?
Oh,
You had that, Jerry.
I had that done.
So, is there anything else?
Thank God everybody here is healthy.
Do what?
Thank God everybody here is healthy so far.
Yeah.
Well, I know they said at work, we've got over 40,000 employees nationwide, and only like 55 of them were ever positive on COVID. So,
It's hard to tell what's going on because of all the politics that gets mixed all in it. Everybody's trying to figure out a way to use this to their advantage in the political arena.
Yeah.
Just like they do every year, whatever's it.
well, and Trump said today, if schools don't start back up, he's pulling funding.
Yeah, I know, but there's also a doubt
They
that
shouldn't
he
be
can do
paid
that.
if they're not teaching.
It's also doubtful that he can do that.
Why do they need funding if they're not doing school?
It may be true. So, is there anything else? Jerry, would you open it up for us, Ann?
We just praise and thank you, Heavenly Father, for this privilege and opportunity we have to come together and study your word. And we just pray that you will be with this country and just heal the mind of those that are in opposition to the freedoms we have in this country. And we just pray, Father, that you will bless our president, and we pray that you will continue to be with all of us here at Elm Branch and help us to be examples of what a Christian should be. And we just pray, Father, that you will guide and help us to take your word into our hearts. And we just thank you for Charles and the work that he was going through to prepare this lesson. It's through your son's name we pray. Amen.
Dave wanted me to talk about Daniel. He changed his mind at the last minute, but we won't go there unless we just run out of Daniel. So, Daniel's really a great book. Daniel was a young man whenever Judah was captured by Babylon and taken down. He was also of the elite. And I should have turned over here in the first chapter. It says, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. So that Daniel fit in that. They came up there twice, Babylon did, to Judah, and captured some people, took them down. Daniel was in the first batch. There was only 2 prophets to Babylon, or to Israel, when they were in Babylon, captured in captivity. Daniel was one of them. Who was the other? They were both young men. Ezekiel was the other one. They were both young men. The difference is Ezekiel, he went down to where the slaves were. He was part of that group. He wasn't up in the king's palace. Fact is, he lived on what they called the Kabar River, which was really believed to be a canal that the slaves had dug for irrigation for the Babylons. But Daniel, he lived in the palace in the beautiful city of Babylon, and it was supposed to be beautiful. So you would think that might be a little advantage, but they prophesied, both of them did, about the end of time. Some of Ezekiel is really hard to understand. I mean, you really have to study Ezekiel. I got tickled when my brother was reading Ezekiel there last winter, and he kept calling me. And I said, you know what, I'm gonna have to go back and reread Ezekiel. It's not something you just retain. But, as you read from them, they both most likely learned a lot from Jeremiah, because Jeremiah was the last prophet to Judah. Of course, Israel, the northern kingdom, was already gone, lost. But Jeremiah was the last prophet before they went into captivity. So I figure they both probably done some understudying under Jeremiah. The interesting thing about Daniel, one of the interesting things is he never gave up any of his praying. He never gave up his religion while he was in Babylon. In fact, there was a verse. Verse 8 says, but Daniel reserved not to defile himself with royal food and wine, and he asked the chief officials for permission not to defile himself this way. So he really stayed with his religion. Not only that, Daniel was a praying man. If you want to read some beautiful prayers, go back here at Daniel and read his prayers. I always thought it was kind of comical, because Daniel looked toward Israel when he prayed. And what he prayed for was Jerusalem and the people of Israel, the Jews. That's who he prayed for. So what does God reveal to him? Does anybody remember what he revealed to him right off the bat? He revealed to him the Gentile kingdoms. I always thought that was comical, because he prayed about the Jews and Israel, but God gives him the Gentile kingdoms. Now, why would God give Daniel the Gentile kingdoms whenever he was so interested in the Jewish people or in his own people? Yeah, he was wanting God to restore them. As you read the prayers, you'll see he wanted him to restore them not only back to a relationship with him, but he wanted God to restore them to Israel, back to Jerusalem. And I'm not going to speak for Daniel, but what he was saying was Israel is not ever going to be restored to the nation that they once was. They are going to be under the dominance of the Gentiles. You remember Dave talking about Luke 21, 24, 25, 26, where he talked about the reign of the Gentiles. And the reign of the Gentiles is going to continue until Christ comes back. I don't know how much of that Daniel understood, but I believe this is what he was telling him. Somebody, Lee, why don't you look up Luke 13 and read verses 34 and 35. I think those are just great verses. And she finishes that, and we'll probably just go over here to chapter 9, which is what Dave wanted me to talk about, was chapter 9. But there's several other chapters, if I can remember them, that I was reading this afternoon. I'm going to pick up on this one of them.
13, 34, and 35?
Yeah.
O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you. How often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were not willing. Look, your house is left to die desolate. I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord.
See what this is Christ speaking here. And what he's telling them is you left your house desolate because you sought after other gods. So your place was destroyed, and it's never going to return to you till when? That's not what he said.
Well, I was paraphrasing.
So basically, you call upon the name of the Lord.
Yeah,
That's what he said.
I wrote it their second coming. So
Huh?
I wrote it their second coming, so I was paraphrasing that.
Good. But that's what he's telling them. Until you call upon the name of the Lord, you're never gonna return to where you are, to where you once were. Another interesting thing I want to bring up before I get to chapter 9 here is Daniel was reading from the book of Nehemiah, and he comes upon it to where he figures out that Nehemiah tells them they're going to be in captivity for 70 years. So Daniel knew that they were going to be in captivity for 70 years. The reason they're going to be into captivity for 70 years is because God told them to give the land a rest every 7 years. And for 490 years, they did not. So you divide 7 into 490, it comes out to 70. And that's how many years they went into captivity, and that's the reason they went in, one of the reasons. The other interesting fact here that we're going to get ready to study is this. When they came out of Babylon, they came out in two different groups. The first group came out and was led by Ezra. The two main people that came out was Zerubbabel, the governor, and Joshua, the high priest. They were sent out in the first group to restore the temple because God wanted them to worship Him. And He wanted a place for them to go to worship Him. And who wants to go any place where they can't worship God? So God was preparing them a place to go to worship Him. That was the first group. Approximately 25 years later, this other group goes, and this is Nehemiah. And Nehemiah goes with money. And he goes with a decree, by the way, as I remember, it was Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes sent them, and he gave them money. And with this decree, to rebuild the wall. The important thing about this decree is it is, this is the decree in which you can figure Christ's triumphal entry into Jerusalem. This is what it speaks of here in Daniel when it says He was cut off. We're going to read here in just a minute. But what I want to bring out is this. From the time of that decree, that Nehemiah could go back and rebuild the wall. And whenever, I believe it's in Zechariah, where God tells them that they shouldn't really take a lot of pride in it because He was the one that really rebuilt the wall. It's phenomenal how fast they rebuilt it. Does anybody remember how fast they rebuilt it? They were struggling.
And all of them participated by family.
By families, that's right. They cut it off into sections, that's right. But they did it in 7 years. 7 years. With what God has given them from this decree is 490 years. I don't know why 490 years is associated with Israel. And I have looked. I just can't find a good reason. And it is. It's important to remember. Because as we start in here in chapter 9, I like to look at it from that point. Because we always talk about the 70 weeks. And by the way, interesting thing I was reading on the 70 weeks is it really wasn't 70 weeks in the original text. It was called 70 sevens. But when they wrote the King James Version, they couldn't think of a good word for the sevens, so they put weeks. And I think that's been a little confusing because it's easier for me to calculate 77s than it is to try to figure out how you convert 70 weeks to years. You see what I mean? So when he gives you 77s, you can multiply that out, and you can see it's 490. And that's what he's talking about, 490 years here, not weeks at all. So, to me, that kind of clarified it a lot better. And by the way, you know, I had a good friend years ago when I was buying for a packing house. He thought the King James was the original Bible. And of course, the King James is not the original Bible. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew, and some of it in kind of an Aramaic, and the New Testament was written in Greek, and some of it a little Aramaic. And Jesus spoke Aramaic. And the King James was not written off the original text, it was written off of the Latin translation. It didn't go back to the original. Now the original NIV went back to the original text to write. Now I know we got NIVs today that's lost their way, but originally that's what they went back to.
I've had people tell me that the King James is the real Bible, the rest of it is commentaries.
When I had the bookstore, I had several that said, well, this is the Bible Jesus used. No?
Afraid not.
In Bible college, they use New American Standard
Yeah.
because it is worded as close to the Greek wording. Sometimes that gets switched around in NIV to how we would speak in English,
It
as
is.
opposed to staying with the words that we would directly translate from.
I can't think, I've got a New Testament up there at the house, it was written, and it was written as close, they tried to write it as close as they could to the Greek language, which is just almost impossible. You know, I mean, it just don't sound right the way we talk. But it is interesting to read. So, what I want to do here is we're going to read these 77s here in chapter 20. Daniel?
Chapter 20?
No, chapter 9.
Okay.
It's in the 20s is what we're going to read.
I was confused. My Bible didn't go that high.
Starts at 24.
I think we're going to start though with verse 23. And it says right there up, right there on the end of 23. Therefore, consider the message and understand the vision. So this is the message and the vision. I read that prayer this afternoon here before, if you have a chance, just read it. It's a really beautiful prayer. It's a good way to learn how to pray, I think. 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring the everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. No one understand this. From the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be cut off, and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolation have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to the sacrifice and offering. And on a wing of the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. So this is the end time. This is what Dave wanted us to talk about. He points out here who this is to. It's as clear as you can put it out. They are decreed for your people and your holy city. This is for the Jewish people. That's what he's telling to Daniel. You read the prayer, and that's what Daniel was praying for. And he comes back and says, now this is decreed for your people and for your holy city. And then he gives us the reason why he's doing it. And the number one reason is to finish transgression. To finish transgression is related to the Jewish people. It's related to the law. Transgression is the sin that means, trans means across. It means to go across the law, go against the law, in other words. You're not keeping the law. So this is, to the Jews, is what I'm saying. Your people, your holy city, the law was given to them. It is to finish the transgression. It's to put an end to sin. Oh, gee, I'm reading that today. Now, I know that Christ came and put an end to sin. And it says when he put an end to sin, he sat down at the right hand of his Father. Oh, gee. There was something I wanted to put in there, but I can't remember now where it was at. Can't remember now where I read it. And to atone for wickedness, that is for evilness, to bring about an everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and prophecy. That's the fifth thing. There's not going to be any more visions and prophecies, is what he's saying. And to anoint the most holy. Certainly Christ will be anointed king, but in some of the things I read, it's also talking about the holy temple. That the holy temple will be anointed, or Christ will be anointed in the holy temple as he goes to reign on the earth in the time of the millennium. Whenever you read Revelation, and you come to the end of this 7th week, you will see that it starts the millennium. So then you'll have the millennium following. No one understand this, from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, which is the decree that we talked about from Artaxerxes, is the way I learned it. I know some people say there was something like 4 decrees that came out from Persia, really, not Babylon. Persians had already taken over from Babylon. Although most of the Jews still lived in Babylon, in that country. Does anybody know what country that is today? Babylon? Iraq. Iraq is modern day Babylon. And what's really interesting is I was watching TV on Iran. I believe it was in Tehran. There is still a big community of Jews in Tehran. And they do not want to leave. Iran has offered several times to let them leave. They do not want to leave. That's home to them. This is Jews, is the way I understand it, that are still there at the time that they were taken over in Babylon. So this decree here is the one we talked about it earlier. It was given to Nehemiah, where he went back to rebuild the wall. To rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes. There will be 7 sevens and 72 sevens. Now, what does he mean here? What is the 7 sevens? We'll just start there. What's the 7 sevens? Speak up.
That was the 490 years, right?
Nope,
No.
nope. That is the 770s.
Oh, 770s.
This is 7 years. 7 sevens is 7 years. This is how long it took them to rebuild the wall from the time of the decree. And then you see the 62 sevens follow that. The 62 sevens are added on that, which make a total of 69, which I think it speaks of also later on in here. But you add them together, you get 69 sevens. 69 sevens is the same thing as 483 years. People smarter than me figured this out. And 483 years is exactly from the time of the decree to go back and rebuild the wall till the time that Christ made his triumphal entry and then was crucified, which is what it talks about in Daniel, of him being cut off. It's talking about the crucifixion of Christ. 483 years. Why is 483 years significant? Because it's 7 years short of 490.
That's what I said, your thing.
That's what it is. I told you the importance of 490 years. You're 7 years short. What I'm saying is you got 1 7 left. You got 1 7 sevens left. In other words, you got 7 years left here. You got 483 years, basically, till the crucifixion of Christ, his triumphal entry in his crucifixion. And he's saying here, now you just got 7 years left. Who's this to? It's your people. It's the Jewish people he's talking to. You just got 7 years left. What's the importance of that? The importance of it is this. After Christ was crucified, what was established? Church. This is where we live today. We're in the church age. There isn't any time given here for the church, nor does he mention it to Daniel, because Daniel don't care. Because the church is for the Gentiles, basically. I mean, I know there's Jews who come in, but basically for the Gentiles. This is under the reign of the Gentiles. Christ has came to the Gentiles. It never tells us how long this period is going to be. A lot of people say it's going to be 2,000 years. It's going to be 2,000 years, we ought to be there. You know, that's what a lot of people say. Could be coming back. But see, it don't affect the Jewish as a nation. And that's what God is addressing here. Israel as a nation. He says, I've given you your 483 years, and all you got left is 7. Okay? Everybody understand? You don't understand? Where did I lose you?
So you're talking about the millennial being the last 7 that's missing?
No, no. No, no.
The tribulation, right?
It's a tribulation.
Tribulation.
It's the end of the church age. It is the, and he will address that in here as you get into 11 and 12. That's really what 12 is about. What there is a tribulation period. But my point of it is the 490 years relates to Israel. And I'm not going to tell you why, because I don't know. And I'm saying that's why they went into bondage. And I know there's some 490 years that took place before. And now he's given them 490 years from the time that he let them go home. In Nehemiah, we have to go home and rebuild the wall. From that time, he's given them 490 years to the Jewish nation. To what? To accept Christ, the anointed one. What did Lee read and tell you call upon the name of the Lord. So that's what he's giving them, is 490 years. He gave them 483 years till they crucified Christ. They have 7 years left. That's what it amounts to. That will be the 70 sevens that it talks about. That will make the 490 years. Then it goes ahead and in 26, talks about the anointed one will be cut off. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. This came in 70 AD. This is when, was it Titus? Is that his name? Titus, emperor, the Roman emperor came in, surrounded. It was a horrific time. They surrounded him, they starved him. The Jewish people ate their own babies. When the Romans came in, according to all that I've been able to read on it, they literally stepped over bodies to kill the next Jew. The blood literally run all the way down the steps of the temple. And of course it was destroyed at that time. So that's when this is. War will continue until the end, and desolation have been decreed. Then we get into the seven sevens. Okay. And he will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and on the wing of the temple he will set up an abomination that will cause desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. And this is what Dave's been teaching in Revelation. I didn't know if we need to go back over that or not. That's what Dave's been teaching from Revelation, is the tribulation. I don't know when the church age will end. It doesn't give a time that I can find. But at the end of the church age, the rapture will take place, as in Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, and then the tribulation period will begin for the last 7 years. So if you take 483 and you add these last 7 years, you get your 490 years. A lot of people teach that the church has become the spiritual Israel, but there's no foundation for that in the Bible that I can find. The covenants as he has made with Abraham are just as relevant today as they will be in the end. So, having said that, I want to turn over, or Robin, I'll just have you to turn over to chapter 11 of Romans. And I want you to read verses 1 and 2 and 25. So you can see what Paul says. By the way, we're studying Romans in our class. Whenever you read Romans, you get over to chapter 9, 10, and 11, it's about Israel. Yeah, it's really funny. I mean, when you go through, chapter 8, such a great chapter, gives us all these, what am I trying to say? All the basis for what you're doing. That's not what I'm looking for. But you get over to chapter 8, it just brings everything together, and then all of a sudden he puts in 9, 10, 11, and it's about the Jews. And then you get into chapter 12, it's how you live your life. It's basically how Romans is broken down. So read that 1 and 2 and 25 of chapter 11. You can see what God's pointing out about Israel.
I ask then, did God reject his people? By no means. I am an Israelite myself, a descendant of Abraham from the tribe of Benjamin. God did not reject his people whom he foreknew. Don't you know that the scripture says in the passage about Elijah, how he appealed to God against Israel? I do not want you to be ignorant of this mystery, brothers, so that you may not be conceited. Israel has experienced a hardening in part until the full number of the Gentiles has come in.
Okay, so what's he saying there? He's saying they have not been done away with, but they have been set aside for this period of hardening, and they will be brought back in. They are the natural olive branch, and it'll be easier to graft them back in than it was us, the wild olive branch. So Israel, God is saying, is going to be brought back. What time will they be brought back? The time
Church age is now.
when the church age is done. But they will be brought back. Isaiah, I don't remember the chapter now, but you know, Isaiah says, you know, that it will be like a nation born in a day. And here's how it's going to work. In Zechariah, in chapter 13, he says, I will refine you like gold. And he's talking about Israel. I believe it's in a previous chapter. It's either 11 or 12. He describes how all the nations are going to surround Israel to destroy them. It says 2/3 of Israel, here in chapter 13, will be destroyed. The 1/3 that is left, he's talking about refining them like gold. I will refine you like gold. And it's going to be a terrible time. It says in there that, in that chapter 13, that he will, women will be raped and men will be killed until they reach the point that they call upon the Lord. And when they call upon the Lord at that time, that is when tribulation will end. It's when they turn to Him. And I was trying to remember, well, I believe it is in 13, where it says that they will call on Him, and He will call them His people, and they will call Him the Lord their God. And that is the moment that He will come back, and the reign of the Gentiles will end at that point. No longer will the Gentiles reign over them. I don't have any idea how our time is. Okay. Well, the light shining on that. So that will be how it will end. The reign of the Gentiles will ultimately end. Is whenever Israel accepts Him, Christ as their Messiah that they missed. In Revelation, well, before I get there, I wanted to read from chapter 12 of Daniel. Chapter 12, in verse 1, it says, at that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. So we learn here that the protector of Israel, to keep them totally from being destroyed, and this is talking about tribulation here in chapter 12, because they're going to be protected, for one thing, by Michael, the archangel. There will be a time of distress such as not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. But at that time, your people, every one whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. So at this time, he says, Israel will be protected by the archangel Michael, who is the only archangel named in the Bible. He will protect them by hiding them in a place called the desert or the wilderness. This takes place in chapter 12 of Revelation. So let's turn over to chapter 12 in Revelation. Chapter 12 is kind of an insert in Revelation. It takes you way back and brings you up to the very beginning. It's just a great chapter. It takes you all the way back to Israel and to the birth of Christ. And it brings you up to the very end. And so I want to turn over to the back of it. And I'm just going to read 17. And what I want you to see here is whenever you get to the middle of Revelation at 3.5 years, then what we read about, this desolation of abomination that takes place, which will concern the temple. That's what I wanted to go back and read over there. I was trying to think of one of the in Matthew 24. That's where I was going to go back and read it. But in the middle of that, 7 years, that last 7 years, in the middle of it, this abomination takes place, and that sets off what's called the Great Tribulation for the last 3.5 years. And this is when Israel is going to be hidden, so they will not be totally destroyed. This is when Michael, the archangel, comes into play to help hide them. And he says, well, I want to get where he's hiding them. I'll just start at 13 here. Then the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, and the dragon is Satan. And he is hurled to the earth from the position that he cannot accuse anyone again at this point. He's the great accuser. If you read Job, you see how he accuses. That's the way he accuses us night and day. That's why we need the advocate. But at this point, it really takes place just in chapter 12, or just a little quicker. But he's hurled earth. He pursues the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman is Israel. The male child is Christ. So we know that we're talking about Israel there, is the point. That's why I went back there. You know that we're talking about Israel. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for time, times, and a half a time. What that means, that's the last 3.5 years of Israel, of tribulation. That's what that means. The place prepared for her is by the Archangel Michael, that we learned over in Daniel. Then from his mouth the serpent will spew water like a river to overtake the woman, sweep her away with the torrent. But the earth helped the woman by opening its mouth and swallowing the river that the dragon had spewed out of his mouth. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commands and hold to the testimony of Jesus. That is the people that are saved, that are from every nation, kindred, and tongue, as it says here in Revelation, that will be saved. Not just Jewish people, although this is primarily set up for them. So that's how important the protector of Israel is in the last 3.5 years. That's the only reason that they're able to survive. I want to turn over to Matthew 24. Matthew 24 is also about the end of times, as Dave has been reading from to go along with Luke. And I'm just going to read a couple of verses here. 24:14 and 15. He says in 14, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand." I'll read 16. "Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains." The holy place here will be in Jerusalem, most likely the temple. Speaking of Daniel here, and Judea. So we know where we are, we know those who are concerned will be that of Israel. So he says, and then the end will come. This is all about the Great Tribulation. 24. If you want to read about the fig tree that Dave was talking about in Luke, the fig tree is over here in verse 32, which is a reference to Israel. So I'm just going to read one more scripture, and that will end tonight, and it comes from Hebrews 8. You would think they did a lot of good things in here about the Hebrew people. This is called Hebrews. Hebrews 8, and I'm going to start in verse 7, because this, I think, is a good closure for knowing that he's talking to Israel, and Israel will be saved in the end. And he says, "For if there had been nothing wrong with the first covenant, no place would have been sought for another." Well, I meant to start deep. "But God found fault with the people and said, 'The time is coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel.'" So who's the house of Israel? The Jewish people. He says, "I'm going to make a new covenant with them." Now, we're under a new covenant as the church. He's declaring here, "I'm going to make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah." I think this is interesting too. Remember, they were divided in the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom. That's what there was, Israel and Judah. So he puts them out here to get separate. "It will not be like the covenant I made with their forefathers when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they did not remain faithful to my covenant. I turned away from them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the house of Israel." So what's he said here? He recognizes here in the past that it was Israel and Judah. That God recognizes Israel when they come to him, when they accept him, they will be one again. "At that time, declares the Lord, I will put my laws in their minds, write them on their hearts." In other words, he said, I'm not going to give us, they're not going to be written on a stone tablet. They're going to be written on their hearts and their minds. It's not going to be something from without, but from within. "I will be their God, and they will be my people." When you study the Bible, that's the phrase that goes all the way through. Even into Revelation, I think it's chapter 20. He ends up by saying this. "I want to be your God, and I want you to be my people." That's what he wants. That's the reason he sent his son. The whole reason. So we could have a relationship with him. That's what he means when he says, "I want to be your God, and I want you to be my people." "No longer will a man teach his neighbor, or a man his brother, saying, 'Know the Lord,' because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest. For I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. By calling this covenant new, he has made the first obsolete, and whatever is obsolete and aging will soon disappear." So that's what he's saying. He said in the end, when Israel turns to him, there's going to be a new covenant made with Israel, or with the house of Israel. It's not going to be like the old one. gonna be a lot more like the relationship he has with the church. Any comments? Any questions?
How long have you guys been doing this? This is so far above my head, anyways. If it is above it all. I mean, I feel like I'm a little youngster in this class right now.
Well,
All I know is math, that's about all I know about this. I mean, I've read all through this, but I'm not getting it.
well, you know, that's the reason I tried to break that down into years. And see how important the 490 was, to see that Christ was cut off at 483 years, so it left 7 years. So you know there's 7 more years gotta come. So the tribulation's got to come. And this is for Israel. I mean, it's like he told Daniel, this is for your people. This is for your city. You know, not for the Gentiles. We live in the time for the Gentiles. The greatest time they'll ever be until you get to the millennium, I suppose. There's no doubt. We live in the age of the dispensation of grace. It is amazing that we don't have more Christians. It's amazing we don't spend more time in prayer, more time in the Word, because this is why He sent His Son. That's the way we have a relationship with Him. And that's what He means when He says, I want to be your God and I want you to be my people. From the Old Testament all the way through, I think it's chapter 20 in Revelation. He never forgets that phrase. Chapter 6 of 2 Corinthians is really great to study or to read on. I want to be your God, I want you to be my people. I mean, that's a great section. I can't remember exactly where it's
In the covenant that he's talking about, the relationship that he would have with Israel, here, the last thing we read, is the exact relationship he has with the church now.
Pretty much, that's what I said. Just pretty much sounds like the church. The problem with Israel, they were always stood afar off. They always did. They wouldn't use his name. They wanted Moses to cover himself. And, you know, in 2 Corinthians, I can't remember now. I remember the 17th and 18th verse, but chapter 3, you know, he said, when Moses came down, as he came down, he had to cover himself, even though his glory was fading. And it goes on to compare that our glory is ever increasing. And it's ever increasing. If we're in prayer, if we're in the Word, if we're increasing our relationship with God, our glory is ever increasing. When Moses's represents Israel, theirs was decreasing because they ended up denying Him. So ours is just the opposite. But it is a great time. I wonder, as I watch what's going on in this country, where people are with their relationship with God. How can you do these things if you know God at all? And He has made it so easy for us to have a relationship with Him through Jesus Christ.
Well, and when you see more and more prophecy coming true, you know, because Scripture tells us we won't be able to buy and sell, you know, without the mark. And stores now are starting to go cashless.
But you got to remember that mark is in Revelation. So hopefully we're not here. I understand.
I think we're getting closer.
I do too. I do too. And I get what you mean. That's really.
The whole thing's set in motion.
Yeah. And you hear that all the time about Christian people. You just feel like the end's got to be near. And I can remember Al Sulzner saying that too. That was a minister when I first started here.
Yeah, but the thing of it is, times down is so much worse than when they were out.
It is. And what's a generation or two with God? You know, I mean, it seems like a lot with us, but it doesn't with God.
Even back then, we didn't have the capability for everybody on the world to see something happening at the same time. And we have that capability now.
We do, but I don't know if we will have that capability when it comes to the two witnesses that everyone sees die and raise up. Because if you read what all has taken place, I can't imagine any kind of electrical grid force in this world. You know, the sky's falling, all this is taking place when they die, there in chapter 11. And I just think it's a God thing. I have said the same thing you said, that people couldn't see how that was possible, now we can. But a lot of what we have is gonna be destroyed. I mean, when the skies fall and the moon's dark and the sun's dark, it's just like seeing Christ. Every eye will see him. It's gotta be a God thing. Because you can't see him on the backside of the world, but everybody's gonna see him. I don't know how to explain it, except it's just God.
But until these things happen, or through these things happening, it'll still be like people are giving in marriage and we're still going on. They think the world will go on. So
Yep.
it's not as dire, like, you know it's tomorrow. It's like, you still are going, people are still gonna be in denial.
But I don't know if
It
it's
depends on
not
who you
tomorrow.
ask too. It depends on the people.
The world doesn't
The
believe
world,
God
yeah.
exists anyway, so.
The world, but if you ask the right people, they'll tell you that.
That's the great wisdom of the Word of God. I mean, you know, just like you said, it's a God thing, and the way that the Bible is written, every generation, from the very first, you know, they was expecting Christ to come back during
Yeah.
the very beginning, and there's so many signs and wonders, and we see all of these things taking place all the time. So just about every generation, I remember my grandpa talking about, you know, it can't be much longer, you know, and it may not be, you know, maybe another, you know, 1,000 years like one day, so, you know, it may be thousands of years into the future, or it may be tomorrow. But that's a great thing about the way the Scripture's written. Every generation thinks it's gonna come in their time.
Well, at least we know something's coming. And
Yeah.
Most people don't.
Most people don't.
And I'm not fearful when it happens. It's
Yeah.
like COVID. I work in the medical field, you know. Well, if you catch it, you catch it. What do you, it's like a cold. You can't stop viruses.
Yeah.
If you get it, you hope you live it. I know where I'm going. That's what I tell all the inmates. I know where I'm going. Do you?
That's it.
And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, it's really hot in one place, and the other place they pave with dirt, gold, you know, so. You get to make a choice. We have that choice.
We do.
Like I said, I'm very simplistic about this stuff. This stuff's so deep.
I can tell you, I was knocking at the door twice, and I can tell you, it was very comforting. I wasn't excited or anything. I believe that God's there. He prepares you, even at the moment you're laying on an operating table. He prepares you. You know He's there. It's a comforting feeling.
Every hospice worker I ever talked to said they could tell in an instant the difference between a Christian and non-Christian at the end of life.
Yep.
Well, I know you and Barb was at the hospital when Dennis passed, and the priest at the hospital, you know, we went in and talked with him afterwards, and he told me, he's like, that was the most beautiful homegoing I've ever witnessed.
Well, of course, I can remember like yesterday, Dennis coming into the board and telling us, you know, that he had cancer. And he said, I'm gonna do everything, try to live for the Lord, it's like I've always done. But if it don't work out, I'm still gonna live for the Lord. And that's what he did.
Comment I remember most about Dennis is, I was sitting there once when somebody asked him, why would God allow somebody like you to get cancer? And he said, well, how else is the world gonna know how to handle it unless there's a Christian shows them how?
Yeah.
You know, wow.
When I worked the intensive care unit many years ago, Columbia, Missouri, I saw a lady. She was in one of the rooms, one of the intensive care units, and all of a sudden I hear all this screaming. And she's screaming. And this is the first time I never saw a peaceful death. This was just the opposite, as you were talking about. And she was screaming, it is so hot, that's so hot. She was like 80 years old. And she was ripping off her gown, throwing all the sheets off, and it was almost violent.
screamed, "Don't let him get me!"
Yeah, but I saw her right till she died, or she died, and she was screaming, she kept saying over and over, it's so hot, she was trying to get away, trying to get off the bed, and I thought, oh Lord, that's terrifying for her.
Yeah.
I mean, but I always tell everybody, hey, God gives you the choice. You can choose what you want, but don't choose it wrong. I mean, that, I got to see it, and that was just, wow. I mean, you can read it all you want, but when you can see it,
Yeah.
that's a whole different ballgame. It burned into my brain. I mean, I never forgot it. That poor woman, that was not the same woman I was talking to just an hour before. You know, it was amazing, because she was so calm and that. But you can't talk to everybody. You have 30 beds in there.
Yeah.
You got your 3 that are half dead, you know, or you're trying to keep alive. And, oh, man. I'm sorry, I just thought it was interesting.
Some of the best conversations I've had is when people came up and asked me. Instead of me trying to tell them, they would come up and ask me. So, it's the way you live your life. People know it. You don't have to go out and tell them a lot of times, they know it.
I see it.
Scott, would you dismiss us?
Sure. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity that we get to come together and study your word, and we ask that you be with each and every one of us as we leave, and be able to come back and continue studying and grow stronger in our faith, and just bless this church and everybody in it. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen.